I'm Stephen Robertson. I'm one of the co-creators of Digital Harlem. Digital Harlem is a website that was built as part of a larger project on everyday life in 1920s Harlem. The project wasn't a web-focused project. The major outputs were going to be books and articles, but it became obvious to us that in studying a place, there was an opportunity to really map the place. Now, any book on Harlem would have a map in it, but at the moment that we started this project, it was becoming clear that there were new digital tools that opened up the possibility for doing more than just throwing a few maps into a project. And really, the mapping in this extended way seemed to us to be an opportunity to understand the space that was Harlem and the place that was Harlem. So one of the reasons we ended up doing a mapping project was because the sources that we were using were full of locations. One of the core sources for Digital Harlem are legal records from New York City, the closed case files of the district attorney. One of the reasons I ended up in the original Harlem project was because I'd used those sources before in my first project, and I knew that one of the things that they were full of was addresses, the locations of crimes, the homes of witnesses and victims and complainants. The original tool we were going to use was ArcGIS. This is a pretty old project now. When we were developing it, 2002, 2003, there really wasn't any alternative to ArcGIS, even though it wasn't a tool that really suited our needs. It pretty soon became clear that ArcGIS wasn't going to work for us, and an alternative appeared when Google Maps was launched, and Google Maps launched an API which allowed people like us to embed Google Maps on our sites and then to lay out our own data over the top of it. Because it was the early days, we were doing a lot of this by hand. We were trying to use georeferencing connected to Google Maps, which in those days wasn't particularly useful. It put things in the middle of the street, so we had to correct all of that by hand. This would be a very, very different project to build now. There's now a range of open source alternatives to ArcGIS out there, both more straightforward kinds of mapping along the lines of Google Maps, something like CartoDB, and also open source GIS software like QGIS. And in fact, it would be a lot less technically demanding as a project than when we did it in the early 2000s because of that open source software. But the emergence of these new kinds of software actually made it a fairly obvious connection to say we have addresses, we have locations, we could put them on a map and see what they actually reveal. And I think the key here is to recognise that mapping used in that way isn't a way of presenting your research. It's actually a research tool, and that's what Digital Harlem fundamentally is. It's a research tool that we developed to help us get a sense of what our sources actually contained. The answers are still in the sources, they're not in the maps. And I think that that's really one of the crucial ways to think about mapping, not the map that shows your results that looks like the map you would have put in a book, but a map that you generate as you work with your sources in order to understand what those sources are actually telling you.